I wanna take you for a ride.
Welcome to Kick Scammers, the show where we normally chat about the scams, the crooks and the terrible Kickstarters, Indiegogos and GoFundMes to ever exist. We're closing in close to 100 videos covering these terrible campaigns, and you know what? I just want to say thank you. Thank you to everyone that has supported me over the years uncovering these scams, with an extra shout out going to my Kick Scammer Detective Agency on Discord, link below, because you know what? And this may surprise you, I actually love Kickstarter. Indiegogo and GoFundMe, not so much, but Kickstarter, when used correctly, I think this website can actually be a proper godsend. As you may or may not have known if you are new to the channel, first and foremost, I am a gamer, a retro gamer, and I actually think that right now, or whenever you decide to watch this, there ain't no better time to be a retro gamer. You got huge blockbuster games coming out nowadays that look and play better than ever before, that will of course please one half of the community. And for those like me that prefer the simpler days of pick up and play arcade style games where unforgettable experiences were in a lot of cases created by small groups of individuals or even just one or two bedroom coders, well, that's more rampant now than it's ever been. If you're in that boat and you're reminiscing about that game or genre that you used to love playing, well, newsflash, it's almost guaranteed that someone out there is making a new game just like that, but they're using better tools to do so, and in quite a few instances, they are getting funding to make it happen from you. So today, not only am I going to push aside the scams, but I'm also going to be pushing aside the obvious Kickstarter success stories as I bring you this long overdue 10 incredible Kickstarter games that you didn't know came from Kickstarter. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. And one final thing, I know I say it quite often, but please do hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. My analytics tell me that well over half of my watchers are not subscribers, so if you want to support the show and see videos like this, ain't no better way to do that than by hitting the big red button. And the bell too. For fans of classic racing games, Slipstream should look very familiar. Of course, plenty of classic games like Outrun, Top Gear, even newer games such as Horizon Chase Turbo will of course come to mind when you see this one, and for good reason. The game obviously takes inspiration from those classic titles, with its real draw being the gameplay mechanics itself. Ducking and diving between cars at breakneck speeds, drifting around corners, and of course gambling whether to slipstream behind rival cars to get ahead does take a little bit of time to get used to, but very quickly becomes way more addictive than you could possibly imagine. For retro fans, you may be surprised to hear that the game actually plays a little more like Outrun's sequel, Outrun 2, which I actually prefer, as you spend an absurd amount of time essentially drifting sideways around the corners. However, due to the draw distance not being as far-fetched as that game, you can sometimes find yourself spinning around one corner and then not doing so well as the track spins around the opposite way. To combat this, the game features a very aesthetically pleasing rewind mode that can only be used for a short while, but of course, the better you get, the less you will need to use it. The game obviously started its life on Kickstarter back in December of 2015. It only asked for $6,000 and it got it, just by pulling in $6,869. What I love about the game, besides the game itself, is the fact that only one guy, besides the soundtrack, made it. And the Kickstarter showed fairly regular updates about how the game started off as an experiment to see if he can replicate those older sprite scaling games of yore before turning into something unique and truly special. Honestly, I doubt this one's gonna sell gangbusters, as it's quite bare bones, but games like this have always been bare bones. You play, you see how fast you can do it, and then you try again. For fans of the genre, this offers enough of a gameplay change up while still feeling familiar. Definitely give it a shot. Paradigm is a comedy adventure point-and-click game, similar to the classic point-and-click games of old. And similar to other games on this list, it was created by just one guy, or at least the majority of it was created by just one guy. It's actually quite tough to decipher. Regardless, your job in the game is to go on some pointless journey to fix a computer. However, as meaningless as this sounds, it's not about the destination. As you know, it's all about the journey, and in this game, the characters and interactions you have along the way really do make the game shine. The writing is simply fantastic and completely unforgettable, as it should be. The characters are overly weird and completely unique, and even though, again, it is pretty short, the most important thing is that it keeps you engaged during your entire playthrough. Well worth checking out if you haven't already. And heck, if you are one of the 1,387 backers that supported it, give yourself a pat on the back for this one. If you're a fan of games like Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle, then you owe it to yourself to check out this game. Lonely Mountains Downhill is one of those games that's dangerous to play. No matter what other AAA title I get for my Switch, Lonely Mountains Downhill is just so goddamn addictive that if I do decide to give it a quick go, then that becomes the game I'll be pretty much playing consistently for the next month or so. So imagine my delight when I discovered that Lonely Mountains Downhill started its life as a Kickstarter. It asked for only €35,000 back in October of 2017, and it raised €45,042. Now, mountain bike gaming may not sound all that interesting, but let's face it, before the days of the PlayStation 1, I'm sure skateboarding games sounded a bit crap too. But just like the Tony Hawk games, Lonely Mountains Downhill takes what is a very niche thing to do and turns it into an extremely addictive single-player experience. There's no music, there's no one else except for you and you alone. One very polygon-heavy avatar that has one mission. Start at the top and get to the bottom as quick as possible. The left analog spins the bike into whatever direction you're facing, and the action button gives you a small burst of energy needed to make certain jumps or to speed across the few areas of straight that you're going to be getting in these locations. Like all of the games mentioned so far on this list, this game is all about the pick up and play nature of its gameplay. After you've made your way down with no timer, now you gotta do it with a timer. Now see if you can do it even quicker. Now see if you can do it without crashing. Now see if you can do it without checkpoints. It's not an easy game, but thankfully you are given so many challenges for each stage that even the hardest of hard levels, without you even trying, do eventually become second nature. I'm so surprised more people do not bring up this incredibly addictive game that eventually got published by the awesome Thunderful Games, a studio that I follow religiously due to the SteamWorld Dig series. And even though this is a simple game, the year I got my super rare copy of the game, it actually made its way into my top 3 of the most played games of that year. It really is that good. Now, I'm not going to chat about this one too much because it's fair to say that I'm probably becoming quite annoying every single time I bring up Xenocrisis, a title that I've not only covered in full with its own review, but also a title that I own physically not once, not twice, but 4 times. And the soundtrack. And no, I'm not going to be going getting that Neo Geo copy. You gotta draw the line somewhere, guys. So in short, Xenocrisis, the top-down arcade-like shooter with the Halo or even Alien-style pixel art and absolutely ear-melting soundtrack originally designed for the Mega Drive/Genesis, is still probably in the top 10 games for that system. And it's only on the top 10 list because nostalgia's in the way, pushing more obvious classic titles above it, because if this game came out in the 90s, it would likely be in the top 5 or even possibly the top 3 games for the system. It really is that good. But again, I did a review on it already, and I'll leave a link below if you want to go and check that out. The cool thing about this game is that it obviously started its life on Kickstarter. As always is the way with these new games on retro hardware, Xenocrisis asked for a humble amount of money, that being £20,000, but it ended up getting £72,569 back in December of 2017 by Sega retro collectors like myself that wanted new titles for older systems. Since then, the game has of course been released multiple times via different companies, and Bitmap Bureau, the developers themselves, have started to work more closely with Numskull Games, releasing titles such as Battle Axe, another successful crowdfunding game which is a pretty awesome, albeit way too short, top-down shooter game, and of course you got the upcoming Final Vendetta, which is a typical Streets of Rage style game that you can be damn sure I will be covering as and when it's released, as it not only looks pretty damn good, but the soundtrack, oh my god guys! Created by one of my favourite DJs/producers, feature cast and the occasional odd extra track by the Utah Saints, from what I have heard so far, this 90s electronic dance LP is going to be worth a purchase on its own regardless of if you get the game. Just check out this small Prodigy inspired snippet and imagine how good it's going to feel listening to this music whilst playing this new Final Fight experience. Ah boy, is this game awesome! If it's not Metroidvanias or arcade racers that take up a lot of my personal gaming time, it's hardcore precision platformers. If games such as Celeste, The End Is Nigh, Super Meat Boy, and even the hardcore platforming sections of Ori in the Blind Forest are up your street, then you will feel right at home with this game. Similar to those titles, especially Ori, the big mechanic with this title is the jumping, or at least this game's version of the jumping. You essentially send big beams of light that send you shooting into other directions before you need to flip around and shoot the opposite way to collect or attack. One more go, just one more go, you probably know already whether a game like this is for you or not, but I can assure you that if any of the titles mentioned seem up your street, then of course this humble little Kickstarter that only managed to raise $33,884 of a $25,000 goal is without a doubt worth a look. In fact, like quite a few of the games mentioned on this list, this title was also picked up by one of those small publishing houses, that being P-Cube, who have also picked up another game I recently backed called Curse of the Sea Rats, which although is still not released, does go to show that the company has a good eye for picking up titles like this. As and when the game comes out, you can be damn sure I will indeed be sharing my thoughts. And here's one for my UK home computing retro gamer followers that grew up on games like Uridium for the C64. An explosive new twist for the time of those classic arcade shooters that did wonders in reviews and of course spawned the odd sequel and a whole heap of pirated tapes because of it. The original game was absolutely legendary, right up there with the Turrican series in terms of showing off what the system was capable of. And besides that one still pretty good sequel well over 30 odd years later, it's back on Kickstarter as a spiritual successor known as Hyper Sentinel, created by the original team for all major platforms. The game needed £15,000 and it gained £21,068. Still, it was a success, it was released, and as it's on this list, it obviously did well within its niche. If you're up for a seriously hard arcade shooter that's similar to classics such as Defender, but honestly a fair bit harder, then of course, this one is for you. The Pedestrian needed $21,000 and it got $30,318 back in January of 2017. What you have here is a very light platforming game where you control the guy on the toilet sign. Nope, really. Thankfully, this overly simple concept turns into a really intriguing puzzle platformer as your character can really only just walk within the world of its own metallic signs. You'll need to master the paths your pedestrian will take in order to reach the goal. Very quickly, the game becomes less about the platforming and more about the working out how to connect all of the signs together, and in quite a few instances, the end result will actually affect the real world around you. One great way of looking at this is it's kind of a 2D Portal game. It's one of those incredibly clever indie ideas that you almost never see from the big publishers, and that's a shame. Thankfully, when looking back through the Kickstarter itself, you have a whole heap of updates given to the backers showing the game's progression. And sure, even though the game is short, those few hours spent completing it will indeed stick with you as the game becomes more complex the more you play it. If you ask me, this, as well as the vast majority of other titles on this list, is the perfect Steam Deck experience. This game is it's kind of a Metroidvania. It's also possibly a survival horror. Maybe a bit of a Dark Souls-like game too? Yeah. Whatever it is, this game is, in my opinion, the absolute poster child on how small indie-based games should be run on Kickstarter. Asking for $25,000 and gaining $63,255 back in January of 2014, whenever this company would post updates, which happened roughly every month here or there, I would always look forward to them. Seeing how the game changed from the still sweet-looking but very basic game into the super intricate final game was always a pleasure to experience. For me, that's what makes the platform so good, if you find the right project, that is. In the game, you are given practically no instructions on what you need to do. You scurry around each screen, running from fantastically well-created AI monsters to another fantastically created AI monster that will quite literally kill you at a moment's notice, whilst you continue to work out what you need to do. The first order of business is to literally survive, running from bad guys, eating bats, and dodging the rain. Everything is out to get you in this game, and honestly, it's quite uneasy for the first few hours. However, if you do like games like the ones previously mentioned, you will actually find quite a lot of depth here with this title. It's actually bloody brilliant. You eat what you can in order to survive long enough in hibernation, and you will need to do this on loop in between hibernation points, which really are the only safe places to go before the world gets overrun with rain and you die. The better you get at doing this, the more the world opens up and the more you explore. Thankfully, that exploration never gets boring as your moveset becomes way more natural to you. In fact, the moveset of the Slugcat is pretty much unparalleled in any other 2D game I have ever played. It really does become quite addictive. In short, the game is not for everyone. In fact, I would say it's actually for quite a unique group of indie gamers, but if you do get sucked in, you will become quickly absorbed into this world way more than you may expect. 663 backers put their money behind Neofid Technologies' Demon of Astborg Mega Drive game. The Kickstarter was asking for €35,000 and it raised €44,835. And here it is. The absolutely stunning looking Mega Drive title with great music and some of the smoothest animations with these size sprites is an absolute joy to look at. The moves of your character are also pretty top notch, I must say, and the packaging is also right up there with the best of the newer modern Mega Drive games. In the game, you control a knight called Gareth on a quest to defeat the bad guys. It's all very standard stuff, let's be honest, and at its core, it's really a pretty standard action platforming Metroidvania that requires gaining new abilities in order to move on in the game. I'm very happy to say that the game feels incredibly smooth to play on the old tech, something that a lot of new games for old systems struggle with, and no matter how many new abilities you obtain, that always stay true even in those later levels when power-ups really do start to become quite experimental, with one particular power-up giving you the ability to take over enemies for the most part to reach areas that you can't due to your size or the inability to fly. Of course, I understand that these retro games on retro systems tend to be given a few extra brownie points simply because they are on those systems, but by this point, so many games have been made for classic consoles that it really is quite easy to spot what's good and what's not. And I'm glad to say that Demons of Asborg is a good game no matter what platform you decide to play it on. If these sorts of games are up your street, then you should definitely check out this one. In fact, its reviews were so good that a sort of sequel, or spin-off if you prefer, has more recently been showcased on Kickstarter after the success of that first campaign, and that game more than doubled its funding goal over the first campaign. And yeah, once again, you can be damn sure I'll be checking that one out as and when it's released. Back when the Switch was a new thing and I had less than, say, I don't know, 10 or 15 games for the system, a long time ago, one of the games I imported from the States was a very cheap platforming game called Tiny Barbarian DX. If you want an incredibly minimalistic platformer that feels super tight and will of course give a great challenge, then Tiny Barbarian DX is for you. You can of course take control of a tiny barbarian in a rather big world. There really isn't much of any cutscenes, but instead, in true classic platforming fashion, the basic story is told by what happens in the game as you play. There are only really two buttons in the game, jump and attack. However, like any good platformer in this day and age, the challenge starts off quite nice, easy and breezy before becoming quite brutal in later levels. It's one of those games that's going to make you lose your mind trying to work out how to tackle each area. It's been a long time since I've played this game, but it's still so much fun several years after buying it on the cheap, and honestly, I had no idea it started off as a Kickstarter. A tiny little Kickstarter back in 2012, making it easily the oldest game on this list. Just look at how humble and old school this Kickstarter campaign video was that again was created by just one guy 10 years ago.
Hi, I'm Michael Stearns, and I'm making a game called Tiny Barbarian. It's not just any game though, it's a sword and sorcery retro action adventure unlike anything you've ever seen. Well, it is a bit like other newly made retro action games, and it is a little bit like sword and sorcery short stories, but I really like that stuff, and if you're here then probably you like it too. So let's take a look.
The campaign video goes on to explain the origins of the game, how he has beefed up the character's animation and even added some new moves, and with the help of you, the backers, he would be able to complete episodes 1 and 2 of the game. These efforts resulted in the Kickstarter gaining a tiny $15,457 of a $12,000 campaign, and more importantly for him, it resulted in a publisher jumping in to physically release the title, injecting even more money in to create episodes 3 and 4. For me, this is what it's all about on Kickstarter, supporting young developers who then hopefully take you along for the ride, showcasing the ups and downs along the way during its process. And there you have it guys, just 10 of many incredible games that on the grand scheme of things didn't really earn much money at all compared to the major success stories that you're more used to. But thankfully, due to their hard work and of course support from the community, most of the time less than 1,000 people per project were able to grow these games into something rather excellent. I always get comments from people saying that they will never use crowdfunding to support anyone, as these platforms have way too many scams, and you know what? I fully understand. That's why this Kickscammer series has done so well for my channel. There are literally so many dodgy campaigns that have come from the big three, and it seems that I'm never going to be running out of projects to cover. However, giving credit where credit is due, the platform has also helped plenty of incredible game developers get noticed by giving them the backing needed to release some brilliant titles. And best of all, as a backer myself to quite a few of these campaigns, watching the backers only updates go from struggling to get demos ready, releasing early versions, getting the community to vote on stuff, getting published and eventually getting released is worth the price of admission alone. Please do take care when using these websites. Use your detective skills to see if the company or individuals behind the campaigns are to be trusted, and then and only then do continue to support the ever-growing indie scene, however you decide to do it. Links to every game I just mentioned in this video can be found in the description. Let me know down below what other great Kickstarter video game stories that you have been a part of.